Our interest in this presentation is to look deeper into the hows and whys of Monet, the artist, particularly in his early search to make his mark, and for the meaning behind the images and what structure he utilized as a painter. Much has been written and much has been misconstrued. Claude Monet was born on November 14th, 1840, in Rue Lafitte, Paris, France. Monet was raised in Le Havre, Normandy, and was drawing from an early age. Although his mother, Louise Justine Aubray Monet, supported his ambitions to be a painter, his father, Claude Adolphe, wanted him to pursue a career in business. His mother was encouraging his interest, but she died in January of 1857. When he was just 16, he was sent to live with his widowed but wealthy aunt, Marie-Jeanne Lecadre. There he was permitted to study at the Académie Suisse, at the atelier of Charles Gleyre, a noted draftsman, and remained there for several years. However, he was called to serve in the army for about a year, where he became ill from the Algerian region where they were deployed, but was able to see the way vivid light filled the atmosphere, and wanted to somehow record the experience in paint. Upon his return, he opted to buy out of his remaining service time and began formal training once again in Paris. Monet met and was moved by the works of Johann Barthold Jonkind, who, together with Eugène Boudin, became an important influence on him. The plein air movement was quickly becoming a major factor in the ateliers of Paris and throughout most of Europe. Artists were spending much needed quiet time in nature, pursuing a personal way of interpreting the richness and light of nature. He returned to Paris, with the permission of his father, dividing his time between his home and countryside, and continued in Charles Gleyre's studio, where he met Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Frédéric Bazille. Bazille eventually became his closest friend. Now let's concern ourselves with the work of Claude Monet. He has become synonymous with the designation Impressionist and Impressionism, a title that was cast upon him and the group as a rebuff from a writer on their debut group exhibition in 1874. It was an insult, to be sure. The Salon jury often rejected the artists of this fledgling group, and, as is common with virtually every new crop of artists, they must find their public and somehow gain a following. The fact that artwork is a one-off production can be extremely tough at times, and the danger of being typecast may also affect sales. So, to remedy an awkward situation, they opted to band together. It permitted the stark and rough finish of their pictures to be acceptable for show, just as they are. Monet found the sketchy, broken pastiches of paint, as used by Boudin, to be his way forward. The only step needed further was to explore his use of elevating the colour with a bolder palette, where the colour did not rely on values for the primary foundation. The secret would be, always maintain light and shadow separation. That is the key factor. As simple as it sounds, Monet was true to that dictum, and by it found real power and freedom. Initially, Monet was experimenting with the larger patches of paint. His mosaic-style application was not uncommon at the ateliers, nor was it new, but for him it was the launch pad for figuring out how to bridge the gap of nature's contrasting shapes, or the light and dark values, toward a tighter range where light is expressed more fully, suggesting vibration. That would mean he broke up the larger touches into smaller ones, very similar to Boudin, but begin to rely on the use of colourful shadows and less on a value range, so long as shadows always remained separated from light, as already mentioned. The Impressionists became aware that a system that permitted such freedom of colour of any arrangement, cooler or warmer, made no difference so long as the separation remained true. In overcast days, the idea was to look at the light as a veil, so the spotting and arrangement of a scene rested on designing the elements primarily. Another aspect of Monet's growth as a painter is to understand that a picture remains a picture. It's paint. It conveys an expression, not by elaborate finish, but always kept as something wrapped in pigment, never trompe l'oeil, or by clever artifice or pretence, just paint. That is, it rests on the idea that the picture's essence is as one views a scene through a window and then discovers that paint is the real object. Anyone who has seen Monet's works, in a gallery or exhibition, is immediately struck by his use of enveloping light. His views of the cliffs at Étretat of 1885 are wonderful examples of this. Woman with a parasol fully describes our point. It is Monet's wife, Madame Monet, and her son. It is a classic example of art for art's sake. These sensations that we have already discussed, produced by very astute technical analysis in paint handling, using colour, brushwork, and separating of light and shadow, unconventionally of course, and overlaying of thin washes to establish harmonies as needed, becomes a powerful mix that excels conventionality, is firmly based on solid underpinnings, fully realized. It is no surprise that John Sargent would seek him out as an upcoming painter, and we have in Sargent's portrait of Monet just such a tribute. There is a stark difference in values from one artist to those of the other. While Monet was seemingly careless as to finish, which sometimes he lamented, he was ever more serious about the total impression of what he saw and put to canvas. Sargent relates that when in London, Monet from his studio window would have some 90 canvases at the ready to grab when the light fit the canvas that was begun and waiting. Monet increasingly used the theme of a subject as an ongoing picture commentary of light passing over the landscape, and in the case of his canvases of Poplars we have a particularly arresting group. Not only are the trees in a natural state of arabesque silhouetted against the sky, but they are lively with nuanced colour covering a period of time or days. His tour de force poplars come as a group, not just as a singular viewpoint. He now looks more deeply into his series of canvases as his ongoing commentary, more like a novel that has another one coming thereafter. A novel in that paintings require much study by the viewer. One can spend hours poring over each stroke as it defines a section, or how compositionally the whole is orchestrated as a perfect union. Monet now is more and more linear as well. Look at how his trees are preserved as they flow into each other, never getting lost, or ill-conceived but refined, drawn with rich pigment. The Poplars series were made during the summer and fall of 1891. They were in a marsh along the banks of the Epte River, not far from Monet's home and studio. To reach his painting spot, he resorted to his floating painting studio that was moored in place. Unexpectedly, he needed to hurry because soon afterward the trees were sold off. Now we turn our attention to haystacks. Yes, the humble haystack that sits quietly in a field, just waiting for the painter to lift it up to royalty and nobility, that in paint provides for the artist a reason to embrace it. How many people have passed by a landscape with rows and rows of haystacks, thinking of the toil now ended, and how they rest peacefully draped into a pattern of pastoral beauty? One of the triumphs of Monet is the lowly haystack, canvases that brought to the world a different viewpoint and all the romance that farm land possesses. He was not alone in this idea. Millet and Dupré and others have portrayed the genre with some degree of success, but Monet provided the impact and the majesty very boldly, like no one before. Monet began his haystack series near the summer's end of 1890 and continued through the following spring. Monet produced 5 earlier paintings using this same stack subject, prior to the series in 1884. Monet settled permanently in Giverny, where many of his lily series and garden paintings were done. He had a love for gardening even as a youth. His affection for it never waned. By 1891, the art colony at Giverny had grown to some 40 permanent residents, most of whom Monet chose to ignore. There were a few to whom he gave some access, painters who in some cases, such as his next-door neighbour, Lilla Cabot Perry, happened to be keen gardeners as well. Perry was among a select few to whom he shared painterly wisdom they all desired. Monet's stepdaughter Blanche was good enough a painter to be regarded and included in collections of various French museums, and the only pupil to whom he consistently gave advice. Some of the most poetic paintings that Monet produced, possessing a romantic mystery and charm, is the series of canvases of the Seine river. Here we find he progressively works the surface with a flowing fluid brush, with overlapping glazes, not in the usual way, but artfully tying together larger portions for the all-embracing look that characterizes all great painting. The river would provide the subject of his next series from a similar viewpoint, and executed over a long sequence of mornings, begun in 1896, working through the summer on every type of condition. Monet had always risen with the dawn, but in this case he was getting up at 3:30 a.m. to be out on the river at first light. He had long ago rejected the long-held idea of what constituted a finished picture, but more and more his conceptions settled down, and his sometimes want of a completed canvas meant more and more over-painting on a single picture. Not the one-shot, impromptu session that hurried to halt the day in order to complete the effect sought for, but the impact of that image in his mind, the context of the idea he wanted to pull out. He was led to constant reworking, much to the frustration of his dealers. Gone are the days of only a single session in front of a motif. Now the number of sessions he expended on a canvas before regarding it as finished might be as many as 60. It is not uncommon for painters, over time, to want to pull out much more with their skills, to fulfill the lust for authentic achievement. In Monet's own words, "I tell myself that anyone who says he has finished a picture is terribly arrogant." When you go out to paint, try to forget what object you have before you, a tree, a house, a field, or whatever. Claude Monet. His words were brief and to the point. After 1900, Monet established his garden, and it is getting lusher and fuller with each season. He begins with the early studies of his now famous Japanese footbridge, and slowly introduces his lilies into the pond, and, little by little, he perceives just how he would like to begin painting them. The weeping willows drape handsomely over the pond, and it's now time to get serious, and so a new series is born. Ever the gardener at heart, Monet says, "I love water, but I also love flowers. That's why when the pond was filled, I wished to decorate it with plants." A trellis was integrated into the Japanese footbridge he had already installed, through the slats of which tendrils of wisteria would entwine themselves over the years to follow. Above all, more lilies were added, hardy plants. "I have no other wish than to mingle more closely with nature," states Monet. In his final trip to London to visit his son, who had taken ill so much so that Monet made the trip to see him, and having known that it was not as serious an illness, Monet decided to take in the city. He visited with Sargent once again, and with the story we referenced earlier, Monet rented a studio space for the time, and proceeded to paint the series of the Waterloo Bridge, Houses of Parliament, and Big Ben. This would be the third and last visit by Monet to the country, and with the haze of fog, with fumes of sulphur in the air, he had difficulty trying to navigate from day to day how to catch the varying effects, as Sargent noticed. By the end of his stay, with some 100 canvases in tow, he departed back to Giverny. By this time Monet was very popular with ready shows and exhibits throughout Europe and America, along with smart investments in the stock market. He was now fully established as a complete artist with honours. Then, in 1904, Monet and Alice were making trips around the capital of Paris in their newly purchased automobile, and made their longest motoring excursion, as the painter decided that he wanted to see the paintings by Velázquez at the Prado in Madrid. And before long they were heading south on a 3-week round trip, that was certainly audacious for the time. In later years, Monet would be bothered by cataracts, but was hesitant of operations because of the disasters with a couple of artists like Cecilia Beaux. But in time, the procedure was done and successful. So, Monet had established himself, and his mission to record and do justice to nature as he saw it was a lifetime journey. His unique skill to penetrate the visual world on canvas was rewarded by the acclaim of artists and critics alike, even overcoming the stigma that as an Impressionist he wore that badge with honour. With that, we hope you enjoyed this look at an icon, an artist who helped to define a period in art that will last. Thank you, and we look forward to presenting many more highly skilled artists in the future. So until next time, it's bye for now.